So let's begin. With his body of work as a dancer and actor over the last 7 decades, tonight's speaker really doesn't need much of an introduction. He's had a 70-year career. He's listed in the Internet Movie Database in over 100 titles.
God, don't remind me.
Including, of course, West Side Story, as well as 1957's Peyton Place, which earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He's worked with some of the best, including Robert Wise, as I mentioned, Quentin Tarantino, and of course with David Lynch, rest his soul, for Twin Peaks. His diverse work over the years, you've probably seen one of his movies and didn't even realize it when you were a kid. My friend's, my coworker's best favorite movie is High School Confidential. Mine, my childhood favorite movie of all time was The War of the Gargantuans. So,
It always surprises me when people say, my 2 favorite movies you made were West Side Story and War of the Gargantuans. I mean, how can you put those in the same
well, isn't that how Tarantino got? He loved that movie so much. That's why he wanted you in his movie. So there you have it.
Well,
Less known is that Russ is an established artist. It's a wonderful artist. Go online, check out his work, check out his website on russtamblyn.com, correct?
I guess, I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct, dear.
And now, spoken from the expert. And now he's...
Bunny.com is my...
Well, we've been waiting, Russ, for your long-awaited memoir, Dancing on the Edge, a journey of living, loving, and tumbling through Hollywood. So welcome to Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And joining Russ is a wonderful author in her own right. She's a former music journalist. She's been a ghostwriter since 2008, penning more than 20 books, including 5 New York Times bestsellers. In 2015, she published the father-daughter memoir, Good Girl. She also wrote a recent release, The Last Days of the Midnight Ramblers. It's a wonderful novel in the lines of rock and roll, the true story of a rock and roll band, the backstage stuff. This is her first novel, and she's in between assignments for a who's who of celebrity clients. Please welcome Sarah Tomlinson.
Yay.
Well, what took you so long?
You're gonna have to speak up. I'm half deaf.
Okay, what took
Aside
you so
from
long to
several
write
others.
this book?
I'm sorry, what?
What took so long? 30 years, right, to write the book?
Probably, yeah. Probably going on 30 years.
Wow. Do you want to go ahead and
It's
take
been so long I've forgotten what I wrote.
Well, Sarah can help you. Why don't you go ahead and take it away, Sarah?
Well, I was brought to the project, I think in about 2018 or 19 through Russ's daughter, Amber Tamblyn, who's a wonderful writer in her own right and director, and she had adapted a beautiful book called Paint It Black by a friend of mine, Janet Fitch, and we knew all these just LA writers in common, and Russ had a full manuscript, 300 pages, like the most fabulous, just who's who of Hollywood, funny, insightful, but it needed a little bit of love and a little bit of organization, and so I was brought in, and I think what I realized, and always with respect to Russ, wanted to present to him, do you think this is true? And to Bonnie, his wife, who we called the brain, she was the one who kept track of everything while we were working. I thought of it as a coming of age story. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Do you remember us having that conversation? Or?
Yeah, I do, and I do remember that it started, and in fact, you changed it around. The original book started with my early days from the time I was 10 or something, and then she switched it around, which I thought was a great idea. She started the book with when I left Hollywood and became an artist, which I thought was pretty funny. And then when we came to our book publisher. The book publisher said, "Well, I want to go back to the way it was." It was pretty funny, but you know, it gets there one way or another. It all goes one way or another, and it's quite interesting writing a book. I don't think I'll write another one.
Well, I think, Russ, what made me want to start where I did was it was almost like a footnote in your book, because there's so many fabulous actors and musicians and poets and fine artists, and there's this note. It's about Henry Miller is a good friend of Russ's, and I'm like, the Henry Miller? Like, he's at your beach house in Malibu? Oh, we should move this to the front. And so there's this wonderful story where Russ and his second wife were in Big Sur, and you were a big fan of Henry Miller's.
Yeah, we were just driving through there, and we stopped at a bookstore in Big Sur, and I said, "Does Henry Miller live around there?" And he said, "Yeah, he's down the highway. You see a bunch of mailboxes. His is one of them." So we drove and wasn't even thinking about it, but we saw it. Oh, look at all those mailboxes! So we stopped and looked, and there was one that said Miller on it, and so I scratched a note on a piece of paper in the car, I think, and stuck it in the mailbox. You know, and just said, "I don't know if you know who I am. I'm an actor," and blah blah blah, and went home. I never expected to hear from him, but got a letter in the mail, and I saw it was from Henry Miller, you know. But it wasn't him. It was his wife, Eve Miller, and she wrote and said, "Of course we've heard from you. Henry's in Spain or someplace right now, but we'd love to meet you sometime." And I guess it was later on. I had a friend who was a big fan of Henry's too, and we used to talk about him all the time, about Henry. And he was in a bookstore in Hollywood and ran into Henry and said, "Oh, you know, Russ Tamblyn would love to meet you." And so he brought him in. I was swimming one time just from my beach house. I was about, 100 feet out. And I looked up and I could tell that it was Henry Miller right with him. So that was my meeting of him. And he walked around and looked at all my artwork, and he would look at it and he'd go, I was waiting for him to say something, but he just hummed. But we became friends, and great friends. And he from Malibu, I had a house up in Pacific Palisades, and he came to visit me there and loved it so much that he bought a house there too, and we talked. But he was my one cultural friend, that I loved talking to, and getting away from the movie the movie colony of people, which was much different. I really liked the fine art, because in fine art I always said that in the performing arts, you do whatever you can to make the audience's head spin. So you write really for people, That's how you write it. And but in fine art, you write for yourself. You write what you want to do. Being an actor is weird, because it's you're reading somebody else's lines, and it's all very interesting, but it's not really you. It's you're an actor, so you're pretending to be something that you're really not. But a lot of people think that, oh, so many stars, actors that people think are that way are not that way. You know, there's something else. So it was pretty. What am I blabbing on here?
I'm going to say that, I mean, obviously, we deferred to the publisher when they wanted to change it and start with Russ's childhood. And it's interesting, though, because I have ghostwritten many books, and if someone has led an exceptional life, often you kind of put the you put their childhood in as sort of the vegetables or the homework for people to kind of explain, like, well, was there a seed of their talent there? But sometimes it's kind of boring. They might have just had like a normal childhood, but Russ did not have a normal childhood. So it was actually just as interesting to start with you as a little kid. So one of my favorite scenes in the book is where we open. Can you tell the story of this financial venture you made with some of the kids in the neighborhood, and how your mom came out? Yeah.
Oh, well, that was, yeah.
So you're about 10 or 8?
I think I was about 10, somewhere in that vicinity, and the kids bet me, and in front of my house in Englewood was a telephone pole, and I said, oh, I could climb up that telephone pole and do a handstand on it, and the kids said, no, you can't possibly do that. And so they bet me, and they all brought out their change, and they bet me, and it was like a couple of bucks, and so I climbed up the telephone pole and did a handstand on top of it. And while I was in the handstand, my mother came out. If you could imagine what a mother said, she came out and she went, "Hey," and she wanted to yell at me, you know, to get down. And she thought, no, I better not yell. I mean, you know, what if he's gonna he loses balance and falls? So she didn't say anything till I got down. Bawled the hell out of me. But in the meantime, I made like $2 or $3. And it wasn't that difficult, I think. I've always been not afraid of heights. I've always been very comfortable on the edge of cliffs or hanging out of windows or climbing on telephone poles.
Well, I think also that's sort of why we called the book Dancing on the Edge. Obviously, we wanted to, you know, allude to what a great dancer you are and how you're so known for West Side Story, but also you have danced on the edge. It's sort of, you're so instinctual. You've made a lot of decisions that didn't make sense at the time, but it's caused you to have this fabulous career and life. So you obviously were very acrobatic. You were very nimble. And your mom had come out of the vaudeville world, as had your dad, and so she saw that you had this talent, and so she offered to get you. Did you start with dancing lessons first?
Well, yeah, but first of all, my father, who had been, it was during the Depression, and so he didn't do so well. It was during the Depression time, so he had to get out of show business, and he didn't want me to be in it, so he really fought to have me not in it. But I used to go to this movie theater in Englewood on Saturdays when it was for kids shows, and I'd get so excited that I'd run up on the stage and jump around. I thought I was dancing. And I'd see the owner of the theater come running down the aisle, so I'd leap off, and I was really fast, and I went like a snake under the chairs, and then about the third week that I was doing that, he was waiting for me on backstage, so he grabbed me and called my and asked me for my phone number, and like an idiot, I gave it to him. And called up my mother and told her what a pest I was making of myself. So she my mother started me in dancing lessons without telling my father. And she started me in, and it was like a tap dancing school in Inglewood, and I really enjoyed it, and I took right to it. And it wasn't until I did a concert someplace, not all by myself, but with other kids from the school, and I did it, and my mother finally told my father, and he was mad that I was getting into show business, but he came to see me and thought that I was doing a great job, and suddenly he liked me. So that was how I got started in dancing. And I actually learned, I took from another a black dancing dancer named Willie Covan, who was an incredible dancer, and he was a tap dancer, and he used to teach dancing with a cane, and he used to tap it, and my mother played the piano for him, so we could get all my lessons with him, and it was pretty exciting. That's really how I got started. And he was also a great teacher. He taught Shirley Temple when she was younger, and several other people, and he was a tap dancer that taught at MGM with a lot of with Ann Miller and the people that danced there. So it was pretty exciting, and I never dreamed of being under contract at MGM, which eventually I did. I made lots of movies, several movies as an actor, as a boy, as a child actor, but never any musicals where I danced in them or anything. It wasn't until I did a movie at Warner Brothers. It was a Marine movie that I played in it, and the director of that movie, his name was Joseph Lewis, and he went to MGM and took the movie and showed it to them, and they signed me under contract as a dramatic actor. And of all places to get signed under contract was MGM, because they were made musicals, and so I was there and just as an actor, and it wasn't until Seven Brides for Seven Brothers came up, and that movie. Thank you. Yeah, and I wasn't even supposed to be in it because they. Michael Kidd, the choreographer, wanted all of the brothers, the six brothers, that's not counting Howard Keel, but he wanted the rest of the six brothers to all be great dancers. And the studio said, no, sorry, we have actors under contract here, so tell you what, you can have 4 great dancers and then 2 actors. And so that's how I got started. And they'd already started rehearsals. And fortunately for me, and the other brother that was a contract player was Jeff Richards. And he was this big, tall guy. He was a baseball player at one point, and he was under contract. And he couldn't dance a step. He didn't even like dancing. He thought all dancers were sissies. And so he was the one that, or both of us were the ones, and we were on contract players, and we went over to visit in the rehearsal hall, and Michael Kidd, the choreographer, said, hey, somebody told me you're an acrobat, that you can do flips. And I said, yeah, and I did a backflip for him right away. And he said, great. We'll put it in the movie. And that's how I got started. Fortunately for me, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers was the story was about these seven backwoodsmen, you know, who were backwoodsmen. And I always thought how silly that must have been to whoever got the idea, and he came to the studio and said, "Hey, I got a great idea for a movie, for a musical comedy. It's based on the rape of the Sabine women." And so that's what the movie was based on. And so the movie, and they said, "Well, who are you going to get for the seven, you know, for these backwoodsmen, these really rough backwoodsmen? Who are you going to get from?" He said, "Ballet dancers." Can you imagine? That's the way that came apart and came about. And I was, and I'm the last one alive from all the brothers. They're all gone now. So I'm glad to be alive.
And I know you didn't really think of yourself as a dancer, you thought of yourself as an acrobat
Right.
first.
Yeah.
But there's a wonderful story about, who was it who came to the set of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers when you were rehearsing, I think it was the barn scene?
Yeah, well, they were rehearsing the scene. First, you got to understand that these are backwoodsmen, and the one of the numbers in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is Going Courtin', and it's where Janie Powell is teaching all these backwoodsmen. Is teaching them how to be gentlemen, because they want to get wives and girlfriends. So that's how that got started. And so the Going Courtin' number, then there's a part of the dance, part of that number where Janie Powell's singing "Going Dancing," and then we all go "Going Dancing." She go, and, you know, like none of us are supposed to know how to dance. And I was the only one that could look like he was learning how to dance. Because we had like Jacques D'Amboise and the New York City Ballet, and Ron Platt and mathematics, and right away they would jump up into fifth position. So it was pretty funny. And so Michael Kidd had no choice really. His choice was, well, I'll put Russ in front because he really looks like he's learning how to dance. And that's how I did it. And I ended up in that number jumping up and down. He just let me go free. He said, just dance around and go crazy. So it's kind of weird the way it got started. And then when we got into the building the barn and everything, it was right up my alley. Because I could do flips and everything so I looked like I was really a great dancer, but I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. But that, I always said that I was waiting for them to make another Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, but I thought they should make a Mormon version, which would be called Seven Brides for One Brother.
So of course we have to tell some West Side Story stories.
Yes.
And so you had to petition to get your role in West Side Story. So you had, if I'm correct, you had seen it on Broadway, the play, the musical, and you loved it.
I had seen it, and I really wanted to play the other part, the part of Tony. It was like, Tony was like the Romeo and Juliet. He was the male of that. And so that's what I went and auditioned for, and MGM let me go and audition for that part. And I kept waiting and waiting to hear, and finally I got the message that that someone else got the part, but they've offered you the part of Riff, so I never even auditioned for it. I just got the part of Riff and went into, in fact, when I went in to meet And they said, "Do you want to do that?" And I said, "Sure." You know, it's a big movie. So when I went in to meet Jerome Robbins, who was the choreographer, and Robert Wise, the first thing that Jerry Robbins told me was, he said, "Well, now there'll be no tumbling in this movie. Riff is not an acrobat. He's not a tumbler, so it'll have to be straight dancing." And I said, "Oh, fine, I'll do my best." And it wasn't until Jerry was fired, because we went way overtime in New York, that his assistant, Tony Mordente, took over the choreography, and he said, "Let's put some tumbling in." I said, "Great, that's what I'm comfortable at." So, you know, I did a round-off backflip with a full twist in the dance hall sequence, and I did several tumbling moves in it. And thank God I did, you know, and I wondered, later on, if Jerome Robbins had, you know, must have really hated it, because he said there'd be no dancing for Riff. And it wasn't until they did a show at Pantages Theater in Hollywood, and it was called Jerome Robbins Broadway. And Jerry had done several big shows like Gypsy and several, so it had numbers from each of his shows that they did. And they did a number from West Side Story, and the guy who played Riff, my part, did a flip. and I knew that Jerry had choreographed this whole sequence. And I thought, that's really far out. You know, I wonder how he got away with it. So when I went backstage and I met him, so I asked him that question. I said, how did you get away with doing a flip, you know, in it? And he said, "Well, in the audition, that was part of the audition, that I had to do it." So I pat myself on the back. That was my contribution to West Side Story. And it was great fun and a lot of work to do. And the kid that played Bernardo, George Chakiris, became a good friend of my wife's and mine, and we just we had a great time with it. It was a great movie. I think one of my favorite.
Number 2 on the list.
And one of my favorite moments was, oddly enough, was they had what they call a preview, a special showing before it was released at this big theater in Hollywood, and it was an invitational only, and it was and it had like just everybody from show business or movies, producers, directors, and actors and stars were there in it. It was jam-packed, and at the end of the movie, they just gave it a standing ovation, and they were the first ones to see it. And we were all walking out of the theater, and people were tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Oh, that was really a good movie. It was great." I said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I get another pat on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Fred Astaire. And he says, "Russ, I'm such a big fan. You're dancing." And I thought, oh my God. And that made my whole night. It was all I could think about. It was not the movie, but that Fred Astaire said that to me, you know. Floored me.
I have to say, I love that story, and also one of my favorite stories in the book is about the other screening, the royal screening. Do you mind telling a story? I know I always make you tell this story about when you went to London to screen West Side Story.
Oh yeah, well, it was a royal, what they call a royal command performance. So it's for the Queen of England was there, and I got to meet her, and we standed in a line, and I met her, and then I went up and sat in the royal box, and it was really far out because Peter Sellers, who I had done a movie with called Tom Thumb, and he was in that. So he was a friend of mine in a way, and he was sitting next to me, and we were talking. And everything was fine, and he was very quiet, and all of a sudden they started. Oh, and Queen Elizabeth was sitting right in front of me, directly in front of me, and so the overture started for the movie, and all the music was playing, and then the curtains started to open, and just as they were starting to open, Peter Sellers leaned forward and said and whispered in the Queen's ear, but I could hear her because he was like here. And when he first said, "Lady, would you mind taking your crown off?" True story. And I almost died. You know? And I told him later, I said, "Peter," when we were through and walking out, and I said, "Peter, how could you have said that? How could you have said that? We're going to all go, go to the... to wherever they send prisoners." And he said she loved it, because I looked at her and she didn't budge. She didn't make her face, did nothing. And he said, "Oh, he says I go and have lunch at the palace all the time," and he said she'll tell me that was a funny one, and she'll laugh then. So. Is that the story you were
That's
thinking?
the one. I love that one. I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about your fine art. And so what really drew me to the book, as I said, I was so interested in the idea that someone who had achieved so much fame and was living this really successful life in the Pacific Palisades in this beautiful house, and quite young, quite accomplished, and as you said, your dad had always wanted to make it in Hollywood and didn't, and so you had sort of had this bittersweet experience of eclipsing your own father and achieving everything that he had dreamed of, and you found that you were really unhappy. You were miserable, in fact. And so at the height of your career, you met an artist named Wallace Berman, and you kind of dropped it all and moved to Topanga Canyon. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about either meeting Wallace or about what you loved about him. You two had such a special relationship, and he really was almost like a brother and a mentor in leading you into
he
fine
was
arts.
a mentor for my art days, for being an artist, and he took me to used to follow him around. He was just my mentor, and he would take me to art showings and galleries, and really turned me on to it. And I had an epiphany. I had a fabulous
Epiphany.
Epiphany. And the thing that I figured out, I don't know if I said it before, but there's the performing arts and there's the fine arts. And in the performing arts, you do everything you can to make the audience's head spin. But in fine art, you do everything to make your own head spin. And that's really where that I enjoyed most of what I did, because I wasn't reading somebody's lines and doing somebody else's dance steps, and it was just me and my art. And the difference is that in a movie you do it for the audience, for an audience's to please them. But I found in fine art that was really interesting was that you do whatever, that I would get to a point where I'd say, oh boy, someone would really like this, what I'm doing. I thought, well, wait a minute, am I doing it for them? I should do it for me. And so that's how I got stuck, not stuck, but that's how I felt free to do art. and I never expected it to go the way it's going to go, the way that it went. That I even started shooting movies of my own, but with an 8mm camera, and I didn't have to wait all day for lighting and all that stuff. I could just shoot from the hip, and I did. I just shot whatever I felt like shooting, and I just did it for my own pleasure and my own creativity. And those films ended up being shown at the Getty Art Museum, and it was crazy. I never expected it to happen, but that was the beginning of my art career.
Well, and it's so interesting too, because you don't ever do anything just in like a small way. Like, you went to Topanga Canyon, you were living in a modest house, but your best friends were Dean Stockwell, who was your childhood friend from being an MGM studio player, were Neil Young, who moved in basically next door to you, and Dennis Hopper, and all of these people who we now think of as really counterculture icons. And so you all were pushing the boundaries together and learning about art together.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of, I still thought of myself, as an actor, and that's what I've been doing, and got a lot of awards for and all of that. But it was the fine art that really grabbed me, and was most important to me, that's for sure.
Yeah. What I will say too, to put a plug in for the book, there's also some great examples of Russ's fine art in the book if you haven't seen it, so that's another way to see what he's done as a visual artist. So the downside was that then you couldn't get acting roles anymore, and you realized that you could work on an art show for like a year and maybe sell one painting, and that wasn't the same as...
or sell a few, but it would, if I'd sell them for $200 or $300 or $400 a piece and sell a few, I'd end up for the year, making a couple of $1,000. And who can live on $2,000 a year?
And that was what you were making at MGM, in a week?
In a week.
Yeah, when you were a young man. So I think this.
So then I went and tried to get back into Hollywood again, and they couldn't, and they wouldn't hire me.
That's how you ended up in the War of the Gargantuas.
Yeah.
that was the part that was available to you.
Yes, exactly.
But then we have David Lynch. So your good friend Dean Stockwell, I think, was it Blue Velvet? He was the first one to meet David.
He did Blue Velvet, and I was living with him then. At that time, we got a place on Laurel Canyon, and we were living together, and he did the movie with that movie Blue Velvet, and David Lynch was having a birthday party, so Dean said, "You want to go with me? We'll go, and you can be my date." So I said, "Okay, great." So I went to the party, and it was at Dennis Hopper's house, and David Lynch was there, and people were giving him cards and funny things, and there was one, and I was standing next to him, and he was opening up this one card, and I remember that it was, it had like a picture of a bunch of women around this one guy, and he laughed, and it had a funny line in it, I can't remember what, but so he was standing there, and he looked at me, and he said, "Russ, wouldn't you like to be this guy?" And I looked at it, and it was like an opportunity, and I said, "What I would really like is to work with you sometime." And he looked at me, and he said, "Next project." And I never thought, that's like a real Hollywood talk. But it was probably a good year later that he started to make the first movie of Twin Peaks. And my agent called up and said, "David Lynch wants to see you about a part." And I said, "Great," because I was out of work. I really wanted to do anything. So I went to see him, and he said, "Now the part I want you to do in this movie, this is this crazy doctor, and eccentric doctor. And so when he finished, I remember I went home and said to my wife, I said, you know, he didn't say the part I want you to try out for or audition for. It's the part I want you to do. And sure enough, he wanted me to do it. And so I went up to Washington to shoot it, and we shot it, and I got the crazy idea to wear wore glasses in it with one blue lens and one red lens, because I thought that would be eccentric for a doctor, and especially one that was a psychiatrist that was seeing people all day long. That you looked crazy looking through these glasses. So I went. So I explained that the brain is cameral, you know, with one side, and the side that's the academic side, I had a red lens that sort of brightened it up and made it brought some life to it, and the side that was emotional and creative, I had a blue lens which would chill it, calm it down. So I had the glasses made, and I went in to see David Lynch and explained about the glasses. And I said, what do you think, you know? And I showed him the glasses, and I said, what do you think? He says, and he had a higher voice. He said, Russ, I love it. I think it's just great, but let's not tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. We'll just wear the glasses. So I got started wearing those glasses. And for my 90th birthday, which was just December 30th, he made me a birthday cake and sent it. He was pretty ill at the time, and but he sent the cake to the party that they were throwing for me, and it was a beautiful cake that he designed, and on the top was a pair of glasses made out of cake. You know, it was made out of my glasses with a blue lens and a red lens. And so I thought that was really, really swell. And I called him up to thank him for it, but he died like about 2 days later than that. And he was just a fabulous director. I always loved working with him, more than any other director I could think of, except maybe Robert Wise, but he was pretty cool to work for, and I always loved that. Now, am I missing anything?
No, I think I was just gonna say one of the things I love about the book, and these aren't just anecdotes in here, because you have really befriended these people. This is really your life, is your dedication to the arts, to dancing on the edge, and I think people have seen that purity of intention that you have, and have, like David Lynch, staying in touch with you all these years later and sending you that cake. And we did an event a few months ago at Book Soup in LA with our friend Janet Fitch, and she made this interesting observation, because I've been working with you for so long and have become a friend and, you know, close to your family, and she said, Russ, I think you really have a gift for friendship, and that people who, you know, we hear stories about in Hollywood, you might do a movie with someone and then never see them again because everyone's always moving on to the next thing, but people in your life have stayed for many, many decades, and I think that's partly what makes the book so enjoyable to read. It's just this rich tapestry.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I have to credit Janet with that observation, but I think it's really true, and you are
Here's
a
to
wonderful
me.
friend. Yeah. So I can tell there's some real fans here, so I don't want us to just take up all the time. Do you have energy to answer a few questions from the audience?
Sure.
And we'll sign some books? Yeah, right here.
Okay, seems like we're all on the same page.
You
as
have
far
to
as
speak up, because
Oh,
I'm
so-
a little deaf.
Sure. It seems like we're all on the same page as far as considering West Side Story one of our favorite musicals, but you've also been in one of my favorite film noirs, one of my favorite horror movies, Gun Crazy and The Haunting, respectively. Can you talk about working on them?
Sure. Let's see. I guess Gun Crazy was one of my favorite movies to see. You know, that I really loved, because it was so film noir, and I only played I only had a small part in the beginning of it, but I loved that movie. Thought it was really, really cool. And then what was the other one?
Oh, The Haunting.
Oh, The Haunting was, yeah, I write about that in the book too. I mean, you could read about that. I guess I can talk about it. It was a ghost movie, and we shot it. Robert Wise directed it, and he also directed West Side Story. It was right after West Side Story that he got the Haunting, and it was a much smaller cast. I mean, West Side Story had all the gangs in it, and it was loaded. The cast was really full, but in the Haunting, there was only like a few people that came to the haunted house, and Robert Wise wanted. He wanted to find a real haunted house to shoot the movie in, at least the exterior. The interior was done at a studio in London, and so he picked this one house that he found in Stratford-on-Avon, and it was like way outside of London, and it was like built in 1600s or something like that. It was really old, and it had weeds all around, and we shot and we shot the exteriors, all the exterior shots there, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. And I had no belief in ghosts at all, but there was one night when we were shooting, and we stayed there one night. And I had, my room was upstairs, and it was right over the front entrance of the building, but and there were lights and noise, and so I couldn't sleep, and I got up and I thought, well, I'll take a walk in the back of the house, and look for the ghost. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see the ghost. So I went in the back, and I remember that in the back of the house, I hate to call it a house because it was like a mansion, an old one, and I couldn't see the black going forward, but I found if I walked backwards, I could see where the lights that were in front of the house were lighting up the pavement. There were stepping stones, so I could see and I could walk backwards. So I was walking backwards, and I got up to where this little graveyard was, where people were buried, and all of a sudden, I got this, and I wasn't even thinking, but all of a sudden, I felt like somebody put a brick of ice on the back of my neck, and I actually made it over like that. I said, well, if I turn around now, I think I can see the ghost. And I said, fuck it. And I just ran. I just ran forward, right straight to the back of the house. And that's the secret about ghosts, is you think you can see one, but when the moment comes, you change your mind pretty quickly. Yeah, you have a question?
Can you talk about working on Drive?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you talk about working on Drive?
Drive. Working on Drive?
On Drive?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I barely remember that. I think I only worked for a day on it, if I remember correctly. But it was with that really great actor that I like.
Ryan Gosling?
And you don't remember
Ryan Gosling?
What?
Ryan Gosling?
Yes.
No.
Albert Brooks.
Albert Brooks, right.
Who?
Albert Brooks.
Albert Brooks.
Male or female?
No.
Somebody Google Drive and
Oh,
see who's in it.
exactly.
No, I think it was the other guy that did the big series that did. I
He
can't
only
remember,
worked on
but
it
I do
one day.
remember that
So.
that
It's like-
that he drove a motorcycle all the way through it, through the movie, and
Robert Blake.
we came out of seeing him in the movie one time, and we were driving down Wilshire Boulevard, and all of a sudden this motorcycle comes driving by us, flying by us with nobody on it. And I said, Bonnie, do you believe that? We just saw the guy riding a motorcycle in the movie, and here it is. We're looking at it, and then it crashed, and we left it alone. That was the end of that.
This is a testament to Russ's life. We didn't even touch on that in your book because he had so many stories. Like, we were getting close to the end, and like somehow you and Bonnie were talking about, and like, oh, Charles Manson, and I was like, wait, we didn't put the Charles Manson story in. Like, there were so many stories that either didn't make it in or almost didn't make it in until the last minute.
It was true.
Yeah.
And that story, when I was living up in Topanga, and Charles Manson was going up, and I didn't know who he was or anything, but he was going up with two of his girls, and they were hitchhiking up to where I lived. So I went up the canyon and took them up there and dropped them off, and so
Didn't one of the girls say, "Do you know who this is?"
yeah, one of the girls said, "Do you know who this is?" And I said, "No, I have no idea," you know. And she said, "Oh, he's the next Jesus." And I said, "Oh." Well, and that was the end of that. Except my daughter, I had one daughter, which is a whole other story. I had an older daughter from a relationship in Topanga, and she was living with her mother, but her mother told her that the man that she was married to at this point was not her father. That her father was someone that she knew up in Topanga, but and so one night they were having a party at the house, and her mother and Charles Manson came up, and she says, "Oh, I know Charles Manson. He lived right around the block from, right down the block from you, or on the same block," and so my daughter, my older daughter, thought, "Oh my God, my father's Charles Manson." It's pretty far out. So when she found out that one time there was a picture of Bonnie and I, and with our daughter, it was a picture of us in one of the magazines, something in the paper, and and she happened to see it. She said, "Oh, I can tell you now. This is your father. It's Russ Tamblyn." And she said, "Oh my God!" So my father's not a mass murderer. He's a dancer. That was my Charles Manson story.
Oh man.
Well, I think everyone, thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Oh my God, Charles Manson, yeah.
Thank you very much.